This is Vote Her In, a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. On today's episode, our guest is leading Democratic pollster and campaign strategist, Celinda Lake. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly Pollock, and you are listening to Vote Her In, which is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. We are coming to you once again, maybe forever, from quarantine, and I am going to turn this over now to Rebecca, who will introduce our guest. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly. I'm glad to be here. We were just talking before the show started about how, of course, hard this is for so many people, but how lucky some of us are, like those of us who are on this phone call, who are safe and secure and able to chat with friends and to be with you all out there and hopefully provide a bit of encouragement and inspiration for the future. So in that context, I want to introduce our wonderful guest today on Vote Her In, Celinda Lake, who is the founder and head of Lake Research, which is a polling firm, but her experience goes way beyond that and way back to, for instance, the first year of the woman. And as I was reflecting on our conversation today, I came to my mind, I think it's true that there may be no other woman, at least that I know, who has as much information stored in her head about what works for women candidates and what works for public officials who want to serve women and respond to women's concerns. So just thrilled that friend and colleague Celinda Lake is here today and joining Kelly and me. And we thought we'd just dive in and kind of begin as we typically do with asking our guests to share with us, how she got into this. I think Celinda grew up in Montana. I have that in the back of my mind. But here she is and has been for many years in the center of politics and national life in D.C. So, Celinda, welcome. And please share with us and our guests how you kind of got into this place and why you do it and how you keep doing it.
Well, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you. It's such an honor to be with you two on this podcast. And Rebecca, the contribution that you have made is just enormous. And I'm really glad to have been able to work with you for decades now. So I grew up on a ranch in Montana, and I was a Republican actually in those days, but from both a dad and a mom who really encouraged me to be whatever I wanted to be. And I think in the ranch culture and the Western culture, there is already that tradition of women's leadership. And then, of course, Montana, very proud to have sent the first woman to Congress, Jeanette Rankin, only person in history to vote against both world wars, which was very, very, courageous act. Then I went to Smith College, which really taught women's leadership and made just a permanent and invaluable impact on me. And I went to women's college because I wanted to be someplace where women were leaders. And then I found out about polling. I was always very active in politics, but I found out about polling my junior year abroad in Geneva, Switzerland, where I met a bunch of expatriates from the University of Michigan and ISR who were studying American voting behavior and applying those techniques to European voting behavior. And I was totally hooked and switched from my career goal to be an EEOC lawyer to a career goal of being a pollster, went to University of Michigan, worked on a number of races there, Kathleen O'Reilly, Lana Pollock, and a number of women's leadership positions. And then, at that time in the political science department, there had been a big push to bring in women and people of color. So we were doing quite a bit of leadership stuff, and then came down to Washington, D.C. to work on the Mondale Ferraro campaign. And Geraldine Ferraro was really my hero. Worked for the Women's Campaign Fund, a bipartisan organization, and then began polling. And in 1994, a bunch of us went off and started our own polling firm. And what we wanted was to have women and people of color in leadership. We wanted to be progressive, but also have a major impact. And we wanted to live by our values. And so that's still an experiment in progress, but I think we've had the great fortune to work for just amazing, amazing leaders and with amazing organizations.
So since you've been at this for a while, you've seen sort of the first quote unquote year of the woman, and now 2018 was, of course, sort of year of the woman again. What are some of the differences you're seeing in both the way the women candidates are presenting themselves, approaching running for office, but also the external factors that are going into their success?
And one of the things that we're really seeing is that women donors are making a much bigger difference. And a majority of Hillary Clinton's donors were women, not for donations. We've still got to write bigger checks and make more money so we can. And then many, many of the women who won in 2018 were fueled by the checks of women. So we're definitely seeing a huge increase in women. We're also seeing more women run, and in some ways Donald Trump was the biggest liberator of women running since Geraldine Ferraro. And it used to be that we all knew that women had to be asked again and again and again to run. Men would volunteer themselves, but women had to be asked to run. And for a lot of women, when they saw Donald Trump win, they thought, if Donald Trump can run and win, I can certainly run. And so it was really a shift in terms of recruitment of women, where women were from all walks of life and all ways of thinking were really volunteering themselves. And I want to really give credit to the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, which for several decades now has done some of the toughest, most thorough, and most insightful work on women running for office. And one of the things that they've really documented is that women used to have to squeeze themselves into these awkward boxes, like they had to be tough, but don't be a bitch. And now we find that women can really run them true selves and give a 360-degree view, and that voters are very, very responsive to a number of models of women's leadership. And it's making a huge difference. It still makes more difference in legislative offices than in executive offices. And it's not accidental that it's so hard to get a woman elected president. That's still a big barrier for us, even though we had all kinds of women with all kinds of background running this time. But it is still true that women can be truer to themselves and that a variety of models are appealing to the voters.
You know, one of the things I thought about when you were saying that is, of course, this podcast was prompted by, as a sort of follow-on to my book, Voter In, about why and how we should elect a woman president. And I'm wondering whether you could talk a little bit more actually about this matter of what happened. You know, here we had a number of women running, but 4 women senators, highly qualified, very experienced, and yet even they, much less women of lesser qualifications or experience, weren't able to prevail. And where we are, which isn't a bad thing, but isn't the greatest thing, is again looking at a woman vice presidential candidate on the Democratic side, 35, 40 years, however many years it is since the Mondale Ferraro ticket.
Yeah, isn't it ironic? Well, I think that voters were cautious this time. Democratic voters in general really, really want to elect, really, really want to beat Trump. And I think you saw a lot of women voters feeling like, I'm just not sure a woman can get it done, and that we can overcome those stereotypes, particularly in this era. So I think that was part of it. I think in some ways, ironically, there may have been too many women running for any one to break out. But I think the major factor was honestly that people admired these women a lot, but they went for the experienced choice, who was also perceived to be very good. Joe Biden has a strong record on women's issues and a real commitment. I mean, African-American woman on the Supreme Court, woman VP, both commitments he made early on. But I think that a lot of women voters were just, we can't. And the most prominent word we heard in our focus groups was, we can't take the risk. We have to beat Donald Trump. We can't take the risk.
You talked about sort of the way you began your work and the type of firm that you wanted to lead, and you have now expanded to be working for, a variety of different kinds of organizations and, working for male candidates. Certainly you worked for a few who ran for Senate. Can you talk some about that transition? What, sort of how you think about your overall scope of the work that you do now?
Well, about a third of our work is for candidates and about 2/3 is for issues. I have 6 partners, so a number of the partners have their own specialty, and the founding partner of our firm, besides myself, is another woman, Alicia Snell, who really specializes in women's issues and women's perspectives on issues. One of the things we're really committed to is advancing a progressive agenda, not just advancing candidacies. And we think that issue work is really, really helpful for our candidates because they may only be able to afford one question on a poll, but we can talk to them about maybe a whole set of focus groups and polling that we've done on a particular issue that may be useful to them. And we have really kind of 3 spokes to our work: initiatives, which we really, really like, which are, of course, more of a Western phenomena where you actually get to vote on the issue itself. Candidates, particularly progressive candidates and more diverse candidates, whether that's LGBTQ or young or women or people of color, we've really, really specialized in that. And then the issue work that we do. And we think there's a lot of synergy among the 3. And our goal is to, change policies in a more progressive direction and represent the people better, and to have leaders who will move that agenda. And so there's a lot of synergy in what we do.
So one of the things about the moving the progressive agenda and the synergy of it is working with the organizations and with the people whom you've helped get elected to work with, for instance, Democratic presidents. And obviously both in the tenure of your firm, we have both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. And I'm wondering if you could share some tidbits with our listeners.
Yes, and in this campaign cycle, we've actually worked for Joe Biden ever since last May. So, well, first of all, one of the things we only work for pro-choice candidates, and we don't ask people to run around with a scarlet A on their forehead, but we're the only firm that has that criteria. And that's just a good surrogate for a number of other progressive issues as well, including labor issues, environmental issues, LGBTQ rights. Our issue work has always taken us to the forefront on those issues as well. But what we found is that many candidates want to be more progressive. They just mistakenly think that these are policies that the public's not ready for. And one of the things that we have time and time again shown, that we don't want to tell you what to believe, but we want to help you talk effectively about what you believe. And so time and time again, our research has shown that a given policy is actually quite popular, depending on how you talk about it with the public. And that what the right has been really successful at is establishing frames, and then also confidently presenting them so that people on our side get intimidated. So we look to ourselves to provide counterframes, and we work with a lot of cognitive linguists, et cetera, to do that. And then to counter conventional wisdom, which I always like to say conventional beltway wisdom is wrong about 95% of the time, plus or minus 5%. So it's really been exciting for us to figure out breakthrough strategies to get newer, more progressive policies in place and to reveal that those are very strong with the public.
I think one of the things I recently read was a history of voting rights for African Americans after the Civil War. And one of the things you're probably familiar with this was the notion of community voting versus voting for what's good for you personally. And I'm wondering whether that's something that you talk about with your candidates and clients.
Well, one of the things we do is that we look at, obviously most progressive policies are rooted in what is good for the community, not just what is good for the individual. But there are two things that we do that are really, really important. First of all, if you don't provide a reason for how we got there, then people will often fill in their own reason, and they will fill in an individual. In our culture, they often fill in an individual personal responsibility reason rather than a structural reason. So we've done some really breakthrough work with Anat Shanker-Asario on race-class narrative, and I think it's some of the most important work that we've done. And it started with Ian Haney Lopez's book, Dog Whistle Politics, and been updated with Merge Left, and talks about strategic racism and how it's been used by the right wing. And I think it's very, very important work that shows you have to provide an alternative frame. You have to provide an alternative explanation. And a lot of times, the second thing that happens is our side will want to duck the controversial debate. So they'll say, I'm not going to talk about abortion. Or they'll say, I'm going to have a colorblind narrative. Well, we are in a very, very highly racially charged environment. That can be your response. I'm going to have a colorblind narrative, but it's going to be completely fail the challenge that the other side is going to present. And time and time again, whether it's on immigration or racism or sexism, we find that you have to engage. You can't just let them dominate the narrative. You can't try to duck. And in fact, it's through engagement that you actually turn people around and appeal to their better instincts and reveal to them the shared fate that they have as individuals and as communities.
Right. That makes total sense to me.
So is that the same kind of thing then that you would recommend for the Senate races? So, the Senate may be even more important than retaking the presidency right now. Maybe not, but we need to flip the Senate. And you have a history of working with Democratic candidates to beat Republican incumbents. So, what would your advice be, especially for the women running for Senate? There's a lot of really strong women running around the country this year. What should they be focused on? What are the messages that are really going to win this cycle?
Yeah, a really good question. So one of the things, and we have knocked off a number of Senate incumbents with women and with men, and one of the things we find is it's almost impossible for congressional candidates to develop their own brand, but it is very possible for Senate candidates to develop their own brand and to establish themselves, whether it's John Tester as a Montana Democrat or Mark Begich as a Alaska Democrat or Debbie Stabenow as a Michigan Democrat. So avoid one-size-fits-all, avoid the national branding, establish your own brand is really, really important. The second thing is, as a party, we're very, very weak on the economy. We're 10 points behind the Republicans. Vice President Biden is 10 points behind Donald Trump. And so what's really important here is to get an economic profile out. And that's going to be even more important because of COVID. And so getting your own version of a kitchen table economics and what are you going to do for small businesses? What are you going to do for working families? Really, really, really an important narrative. And then for most Democratic who beat Republican incumbents, they take back seats. They do so by winning women by more than they lose men by, and understanding the importance of women voters and really targeting them early is very, very important. And I will guarantee you in these Senate races, the key swing voter is going to be an older 50-year-old non-college educated woman voter. Correct. The last thing I would say is turnout is important. In all of these cases, even in states that were solidly Republican and where ticket splitting was very important, like Alaska, like Montana, the turnout was also very important of unmarried women, of younger voters, of people of color, of Native Americans who are often ignored. So turnout and persuasion were key to beating incumbents.
So going to you were talking about the importance of older women voters. Can you share some advice for those who are listening and women at the grassroots around the country about how they should focus on, for instance, in the first place, working with women voters they know and then with others in their community?
Yeah, I think there are two things. So number one, don't assume that all your friends, all your members of your book club, all of the people that are in your NOW chapter or your League of Women Voters chapter are registered and have regular history turning out to vote. In many, many cases, about 43% are not registered to vote. And there were, in 2018, 37 million missing women voters, even when we were winning. So really important to get your friends, your family, your book club, your mom's listserv registered, and really important to get them out to vote. And that's going to be even more important in the COVID environment, where we're going to move to very confusing voting systems in a lot of states. People who are low information, low propensity are going to be confused about whether they're registered or not. So all of that's super, super important. The second thing that, and for all of us, vote by mail. Vote by mail really increases the turnout of women voters, men too. The second thing is, particularly for the swing women voters, they're often immersed in a very Trump-oriented communication channel. Fox News is on. They believe their husbands know more than they do about politics. They're very engaged in a Trump-dominated network. And it is important for us to provide alternative information sources and not conflictual, because they hate conflict and divisiveness, but balanced information from multiple sources, having your friends make a plan to get the information they need to vote a little bit by a little bit, because they don't have hours to read, particularly now with homeschooling and everything else. They don't have hours to read the newspaper, et cetera. So working to establish alternative channels of communication is one of the most important things that can be done right now, so that women can make up their own minds. And we need a record number of married women who don't agree with their husbands on how to vote to win the 2020 elections.
Right. It's kind of scary, but what an opportunity.
So I had heard that people are really answering the phone a lot more these days. And I wonder, just from the perspective of polling, do you think you'll get more accurate results? How do you factor that in, knowing that you're getting a different a community of people answering the phone perhaps than you normally do?
Well, it's been great for us. I mean, we are finding it easier to get more representative samples. People are answering the phones. And in fact, we have people that are saying, I never answered this phone, but I picked it up because I'm just here. And people are doing more online and participating in focus groups. So our participation rates are off the charts. And it's really, really good in terms of getting representative samples. And we've all done a lot, particularly since 2016, to have double and triple checks on the representativeness of our samples. But if anything, it helps. And while the news won't cover anything but COVID, or it seems that way, voters are very eager to talk about any number of topics. Like, we just finished a survey on sex education, and I have to say I was kind of worried that, we would be having a whole survey on sex education, COVID, and people were like, I really believe in sex education. It was so nice to talk about something other than COVID. So we're finding that surveying is very, very successful, and that we are able to get really good response rates.
And so last question, and of course, whatever else you want to share with us will be wonderful, related to this opportunity to get more response and feedback, and to the fact that many of the people out there are young people who obviously are also at home. What is your particular counsel to these young people who are home now, may have all got cell phones? They probably do. How can they work with your clients and the organizations we all care about? What do you see as that priority?
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, as young people for whom, online is like their first language, I think they can be so helpful because all campaigning is moving virtual. And I think they have great ideas that most campaigns would be extraordinarily receptive to. So just suggesting an idea and offering to help organize it with your friends. Mm-hmm. And then the second is so many young people are feeling discouraged about politics, and it's really, really important that they participate. So starting that relational organizing now, starting virtual organizing now, really, really, really important. And then take advantage of those phone rates that if they'll pick up the phone for us, they'll pick up the phone for you. So phone banking can be very successful right now.
I remember phone banking back for Hillary Clinton, and I was tallying up the numbers, right? And I thought, no, I can't get depressed about this. I just have to keep going, right? But good to know it'll be easier now. Well, Kelly, anything else from you before we thank Celinda?
Yeah, I just, I think everybody needs to continue. We've said this every time, but, extend grace to yourselves. It was a challenging moment in our household this morning, trying to get all the Zoom calls set and all the homework done. But I think we're all learning great new multitasking skills. So hopefully that will serve us well moving forward.
And tell your daughters to run for office.
Talking to my nieces nonstop. They're not taking my phone calls. I'm here to tell you. That's the challenge at the moment. I keep feeding them books and articles and so on and so forth. And Kelly is training two wonderful sons to be great feminists. I can vouch for that.
We need that. We need that.
Watching
more
them.
than anything.
So, yeah. So, Celinda, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think what we'll do is we'll share some of that. You referred to the Barbara Lee Foundation. And for those of you who are out there curious about that great work, we're going to share some of that on the website along with the podcast with Celinda. So again, thank you. And everybody take good care.
Thank you so much.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our segment editor is Rachel Wallstad. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.